Good morning to the today's lecture in entrepreneurship research. In the link to the last lecture where we were speaking about innovation management, we will treat the point user innovation in this lecture. Also, user innovation is something which you could say is more or less belonging to the field of marketing. But the field of marketing and innovation management overlap. It has certainly something to do with how do we get the users of products, the users of processes, whatever is innovated into development processes themselves. When you go back in the past, actually users were innovating, very reacting. In the past, you build a wall against enemies because you were reacting to that. You improved your agricultural processes by the aim of having more food, of having a more stable living conditions. So most things were reactive things. But since we started in the 19th century, as we were talking about last lecture, we purposefully and in teams and in research and development departments look for innovations. Innovations are not inventions. I mean, innovation comes first, and when an innovation is transformed into something for users, people who actually use it, need it, demand it, then an invention becomes an innovation. But the point for most startups is what can we offer someone that is used? Are there people outside or companies in a B2B business that will use our products and innovations? And maybe how can we get our users, whether B2B or consumers, into innovation processes? How can we make them part of the whole process in innovating to actually bring something to users they really need and they really want to have? And that's the question many startups ask, many companies ask. How do we get the voice of the customer into this process? And listening to the voice of customers is rather new. I mean, you will be surprised that it just started in the 70s of the last century, that companies were going so far and saying, okay, we ask customers for the demands, wishes, requirements, what do they actually like? And that started in the 70s in Japan and then spread it very quickly throughout the world, so that actually the creators of innovations at this time, this company, enterprises, were actually going to the customer and they were asking this market research how they perceive new products, what they demand, what they would like to have in the future, which features should be improved. And customers can actually be approached, or customers, users, we all can be approached in three roles. We can be approached when using a product or process. We can evaluate the process, we can have an opinion about the process, we can say whether we like it, we could say how to improve it. But we also could be a creator. I mean, all this development to open innovation, to communities that develop themselves, software or other things, to lead user communities, we will come to that. Users also got creators of the process and being in the middle of the process. And of course, in a very classic way, a user, we all could be a research. We could be asked what we think about future products or how we imagine future products, what are our demands in the future. So the whole marketing research is going in this direction. So actually users, we all, can be used along the innovation process, in the beginning as research, in the middle as creator, and in the end, after something has been released, as users. And there have been a lot of concepts. I mean, when it started in the 70s, one of the first concepts which was really popular in the 80s and 90s, the total quality management concept, and in this quality function deployment or house of quality. It was the first fully formulated concept of involving customers right in the beginning of the process. The next one, which is often used nowadays, is beta testing. In contrast to alpha testing, where you have a concept, a new product, you test it in-house in your own company, in your own organization. Beta testing is going outside, having customers testing that. You know that from every large company, Apple, automotive car companies, that test their early products with customers on functionality, on design, how they can be handled, what mistakes are in there, what bugs can be improved or removed. So that's a beta testing in the end of the process. Then we have concept testing. That's rather in the beginning of the process. And we have consumer idealized design. That's also quite in the beginning. We will come to that. Also to the mentioned lead user method. Quality function deployment, so that you get the voice of the customer into all processes in the company. That started right early with market research effort, surveys, focus groups, qualitative observations, to actually get the customer needs and customer perception into the process. And then you can actually see what competences do we actually have in a company, what's feasible, what are the costs, and then decide with engineering measures what you're going to do. And that's quite early, so that's the first attempt of really getting perceptions and demands into the process. Another mentioned aspect is beta testing. So the testing of a new product or innovation, not in-house, from your own people, from your own employees, but outside. I mean, you know it maybe from automotive industry, that Alkönig prototype cars, which are quite common and which have a special design patterns on the outside. Erkönig, by the way, is going back to a poem of Goethe in Germany. And these cars are driven by people that are hired and drive them and test them and driving through the countryside. A friend of mine was doing that for one big German automotive industry producer or car producer. So that's something not only for testing all function and all things that have to be working in a car or which have to be okay for any product. That's also nowadays a bit used as marketing efforts. So that the first small group of people gets a new feature, a new product and can test it and give feedback on it. And you promote it in a way that the product already becomes a hype and gets very important. So beta testing, it's next to actually testing functionality, a lot of marketing around nowadays and used for both sides. So you have total quality management or function deployment right in the beginning before you start innovating as input, getting the perceptions and demands of customers into that. And you have beta testing quite in the end. The next method, concept testing, is also going into the beginning where you actually use people in testing, in developing and testing concepts. The concept testing is done in a way that you have a new product concept. You do not have the product itself. You have a prototype. And you go with surveys, you go with focus groups, to people in testing those concepts. Is it acceptable? What could be changed? Do people really use it? Does the concept work among customers, users? Example is, for instance, Yamaha, a producer of music instruments. This company always tests new music instruments or new generation of music instruments as keyboards together with users, with musicians all over the world. They get a questionnaire, a design questionnaire, to fill in after they have tested this new product concept and can giving opinions, can judge it, can evaluate it. Based on that, the concepts of new music instruments or new generation of music instruments are improved and maybe even not followed on, because the evaluation is so bad that you are not going to develop, innovate this new product. And another is consumer idealized design. That is going back that you are not letting engineers or specialists, experts designing a concept or a design. You use consumers. And that's not only done in companies as General Motors. You also can imagine at urban planning, so that you have the inhabitants of a town sitting together and planning what comes next in their towns. You can imagine that in many, many circumstances that consumer idealized design is used not only for commercial reasons, you can also use it for many more reasons in redesigning landscapes, recultivating landscapes, in urban planning, also in a sustainable transition towards green energy. Okay, but all that concepts have some flaws, something that might not really work. I mean, what we were talking about last week was also brainstorming doesn't work. So if you work with focus groups, you have the same processes going on in this small networks in focus groups, that people don't dare to say anything, that brain capacity is limited, that you have dominating team members. So it's actually working with these groups has the same disadvantages as you would do brainstorming. What you saw is three concepts of what you saw are right in the beginning of an innovation process, and one is right in the end. There are hardly any concepts of creators, really having users as creators of products. What also is neglected is the customers of suppliers. I mean, a lot of products are modular products, like laptops or cars. So a lot of these parts in these products come from suppliers, although they have, of course, certain consumers. So you have to go step by step in the value chain in actually getting users into the process. And what we know from market research is many people don't actually know what they want. And that's a huge drawback for market research. If people cannot really express, say, imagine what they actually want in the future, what needs to be changed, what are their demands or future demands. That's a real problem because then it gets really hard to come up with new generations of existing products or with rather new innovations. But a certain percentage of customers is always quite ahead of that. They are really developing products themselves. They have ideas about new products, and that part probably, or is normally also the first using new products. They're mostly very creative people, but it can be all of us. We all have certain hobbies, certain interests, and we are into one certain topic. We are an expert of something. We all are experts. And maybe we are also lead using and thinking about what can be improved in a certain circumstance, what can be better. And other people really do. I mean, a lot of sport equipment is developed by sporters themselves, surfing equipment, kite surfing, mountain biking, other equipment for surgeries. The doctors themselves developed it. There are many more examples that people really went into development processes. And you see it with this hall of open innovation when you go to software. Let it be statistical software that are developed by people being interested in it. Let it be software for any private use. So you have many open source software and open source projects where people themselves, a kind of lead users, develop products. And research actually shows that the products get much better with that. That if you see here, this LU lead user products, The novelty is higher, the originality is higher, but also the profit gets higher by doing so. Here you have some studies that are very well studied about this lead using products. Equipment for outdoor sports, medical surgery, mountain biking, library information systems, pipe hangers, and that's rather outdated list. So you have many more products developed by lead users. But what are lead users? Lead users are people that improve products or come up with new products for their own benefit. Lead users are not necessarily people who want to make a profit with it or have a commercial interest. No, they're just coming up with new products for their own use, like kite surfers, like mountain bikers, like people developing, like the worldwide web was developed by someone actually being interested to communicate over distances. So there are many people who develop out of their own use. And of course they are a bit ahead of a trend. I mean, what we do, how our wishes, demands, our behavior is of course influenced by the networks we are in. So when someone goes for something new, and that only for private reason and for their own benefit, it's also often a kind of trendy behavior and being ahead of trends. There are many companies who use that. The most famous one, it's not on the slide here, it's maybe Lego. Lego had huge problems, or financial problems, business problems at the end of the 19th of the last century. And then they reorganized the entire organization in a way that they more or less got rid of their own research and development department and created platforms for users to create new products. And that worked out. So children develop products for children, women develop products for women, and for every niche you have a certain group of people being interested, being into that, and Lego actually profits from the users a lot because the users do the work of the formerly existent research and development department. And you have many other examples. Gatorade was developed by American sport teachers, and many other examples are displayed here. The problem is, yes, lead users can actually improve and fill the gap in getting customers into innovation processes, because they can be right in the beginning, they can be in the middle, and they can be in the end. So they actually cover the entire process. The difficulty is how do you find them? And that was once a research question we were asking. When we take a social network, as you have seen it before, what actually could be a lead user? I mean, going into theory, we know that the behavior, also our creativity and with what we come up, heavily depends on the social network we are embedded in. And the theory actually would predict that people that are provided with very different information from different sources, which are very efficient in their information use, are more creative than others. Maybe it's not a causality, because we cannot say that people on purpose go in this network position. Maybe it's the other way around, and the network position makes them creative, or they are creative and looking for the network position. We don't know that, but we can actually hypothesize a correlation. When people have this network position, they are more creative. This network position is described as betweenness centrality, having the shortest geodesic distances, meaning being on all lines of communication where you are in, having the shortest distances to all players, as Heather, in this case, would have. Taking that as hypothesis, so lead users should have a high betweenness centrality in offline and online social networks. We could identify lead users by just calculating the degree centrality score of people, and with a certain likelihood we find lead users. So we were doing that at school classes first in an offline world. and we're taking the networks of school classes, and we easily could calculate network positions. Here, typical setting at a school class, there are 4 classes. You have also interconnection between classes. And you see those 2 numbers, the 65 and 113. And 113 is certainly a young adult being in between the school classes, having a high degree on betweenness centrality, and the 65 is in one group, not connected to other classes, having a very high degree centrality, but is not high in betweenness centrality. So what we also did was, okay, we used questionnaires, we use it for kids with 7 years old, which is a kind of questionnaire. Can they really comprehend that? Can they fill that in? So for that, we also were doing in 16 school classes camera recordings. The children got a task. They could solve the task with other children together, and they did that, and we were recording that, and we're actually looking who is working with whom in getting out the network. And surprisingly, the network recorded by a camera in a room and the network based on the questionnaires to the children were highly correlated with 0.7. And what we also found that indeed children with high lead user characteristics are also high in betweenness centrality, or the other way around. By the way, we were measuring betweenness centrality also once with a questionnaire and once with the problem solution. When these children got a task, they came up with a problem solution, and we had external experts rating that, how original and users' ideas were. So taking this school classes, we could actually say, okay, we find that children who are high in betweenness centrality are also high in lead userness, or that there are lead users. In the next step, we were doing that in an online world. We were going to one online world. We were actually making a cooperation with MIT, and we were using a software, Condor, which you could actually look up at Swarm Creativity, this link here. And Condor can go through this online social networks as Twitter, Facebook, and determine network positions of certain actors. Next to that, we were going to go to companies, and we were looking whether these companies, we were going to companies, we were looking whether these companies actually have somehow identified lead user. And most of the companies use a snowball approach doing that. They go out, ask people, do you know a lead user? Okay, yeah. And do go to this people and go to the next people. And it's a very inefficient way of doing that. You need a lot of resources in finding a couple of lead users. But they identified lead users as Deutsche Telekom, Palfinger, and so on. And we are getting this data and this people, and we were just scanning using this Condor software whether we also can find whether these people in online social networks have a lead user status. And indeed, we found that 75% of these people had a lead user status. In the next study, we were going to plumbing.com. That's a big blog on plumbing issues. There are 7,000 people in there. It's very vivid communication. And we were actually testing the same hypothesis again. Can we actually identify lead users by looking at betweenness centrality in this blog communication? And we did, and we used a certain method, and that's an ethnographical method in actually identifying lead users according to their what they were communicating according to the contents they were delivering in this blog. And we were identifying the communication structure to identify the betweenness degree. And indeed, we found lead users and betweenness centrality highly correlate. And we did that in many more studies. Another study what we did was a study among young adults in France and fashion. Do they actually being innovative in creating fashion, in combining fashion? I mean, for young people, for certain young people, probably not for all, it's a big issue. And we were looking in a row of hypotheses if self-esteem, the need for uniqueness, and also the betweenness centrality affects the innovativeness of fashions among young adults. So if you see this model we had, it's need for uniqueness, and that comes together with a creative choice of counterconformity and avoidance of similarity. So you want to be different to other young adults, and that makes you being innovative in what you wear in your fashion, or you are being high in betweenness centrality, and being high in betweenness centrality, being provided with this very different information, makes you high in consumer innovativeness. And we were testing that first with a structural equation model. That's something often used in science, and that's another alternative to regression models. Here you have also dependent and independent variables, but you also look at the relationships between all variables in that setting. So we were also looking on paths of development. So self-esteem might relate, and it indeed relates to a higher betweenness centrality. So if you have more self-esteem, you have a higher betweenness, you are more between groups, you maybe dare to be more between groups, but you also have a higher need for uniqueness. You want to be different, or your fashion wants to be, you want to have your fashion different to others. And that all both leads to a higher consumer innovativeness. And that differs with age, that differs a bit with gender, and that's the study. We also found out that betweenness centrality actually has a very, very significant effect on the consumer innovativeness. So lead users, innovative consumers, can be found in social networks. Here you see the gender difference. It's stronger in males than in females. So, and at the end of the day, we also were testing that with a regression, but with a hierarchical linear modeling. What I explained, when you have different school classes, like with these young adults, it could be different according to the school class. So you have two levels, and for controlling for this level, you do a hierarchical linear modeling. And here you see the results of this modeling, and you also see that it differs between school classes. If you look at the second level, this is highly significant. To display that a bit, when we look at betweenness centrality, the relationship between betweenness centrality and consumer innovativeness could be dependent on the school class rather than on the entire population. Therefore, we have different levels, and we might find positive, negative, or no relationship in there. What we would not find if you would take the entire sample without having the second layer of school classes. So, what can you take with you from this lecture? Going to customers, users, going to us and asking us what we want, it's rather new, from the 70s, 50 years old. It's not old. Developing certain methods in the beginning, we had many methods, concept methods in the beginning of a process, of an innovation process. You have this beta testing one on the end. The first method actually developed in the 80s from von Hippel. The lead user method came in later in the 90s, and in this century, in the last 20 years, as most important method, where you actually get the customers in all phases into the innovation process. In the beginning, as co-creator, and in the end, as user. And what we can say from our own research, and you can develop many other research ideas around that, is that the lead users are positioned between clusters, having a high betweenness centrality in offline and online social networks. But that the lead users more and more determine product development processes for all products. For technical products, also for software products, for product processes, up to certain developments, political developments, urban planning, many more things are more or less determined by lead users, people being private experts. And that's a very important topic also in citizen science, where research and development departments from companies open up to the citizens, the users, but also universities, academic institutions open up to that. And thanks a lot.